So sometimes in poker, you make a good play that ends up with a negative result. Other times you make a bad play that ends up with a positive result. This is an example of the latter. Let's look at two hands and talk about where the heck these check races went wrong. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to review two hands that were not in vlog episode number 9, but were from the exact same session. Without further ado, let's jump right into them. Alright, this first hand we are in the small blind, playing 1-2 with a $5 straddle on the button. Look down at suited, get called by the big blind. Hijack decides to raise to 25 total. Cutoff calls, straddler folds, I continue, big blind folds, and end up going three-way to the flop. Flop is queen, queen, 6 rainbow. I check. Hijack takes a while, checks, cutoff checks behind. Turn is the 8 of diamonds. I check again, bet of 25 by the hijack. Cutoff goes away, and I decide to check raise this to 75 total. So to analyze this check raise, we are going to use Flopzilla Pro, but we're also going to use a checklist that was developed in Core. If you're already a member, you can go to the Facing Bets lesson. If you are not, you can always enroll in Core today at redchippoker.com/core or link in the description box. But essentially, here is the checklist. Number 1, what pot odds are you getting right this moment? Number 2, are there players left after you? Number 3, what did your opponent bet with in this situation? Number 4, how does your hand do against their betting range? Number 5, what is the EV if you raise? And number 6, what is the EV if you call? Well, in this situation, we're just going to assume that we have complete air, really no blocker value, really no hand of interest, note, or possible chance of winning, which whatever, let's just say that that's the case in this situation, and yeah, I have a really, really bad hand in this spot. What are we looking at here? Well, we don't really care what pot odds we're getting in the sense of we're not going to be calling here, and that also goes to option number 6 in the checklist of what does the EV look like if we just decide to call here, right? Or are we really going to check call and then lead rivers? I don't think that makes a lot of sense with value hands, yet alone air, so I'm not really looking at those options. I'm more interested in the other ones. So are there players left after us? No, it's just us. So really we're thinking about what did our opponent bet with in this situation, and we have to keep in mind that they did raise preflop, they did check the flop, and then they are betting a fairly small number on the turn. And how does our hand do against their range? Again, we're thinking it's air, and largely, what is the EV if we check raise bluff? That's what we're really focused on here, and we can use Flopzilla Pro to start answering that. Alright, so pulling up Flopzilla Pro, let's get to work and start plugging in some stuff. Let's start by plugging in the board, which is the Queen of Clubs, Queen of Diamonds, 6 of Hearts, and 8 of Diamonds on the turn. Normally, we would put our whole cards over the dead cards, but again, we're just going to assume that we have complete air, doesn't really block or impact anything whatsoever, and yes, that is the case in this spot. And let's plug in our opponent's range. So this is the range that we think they're going to raise $25 with preflop, and then not see bet the flop in a multi-way pot, and then decide to bet the turn for 25 after I check. So I think we can definitely put some of the stronger stuff in there. I think the slow played stuff makes a tremendous amount of sense. So let's put queens, 6s, and turned full house with pocket 8s. Thinks that all makes a decent chunk of sense. I think they could definitely be taking this kind of line with something like 9s through jacks, now feeling more confident and trying to get some amount of value. I think they're probably going to do this some chunk of the time with aces and kings. I think a decent chunk of players will do this a lot of the time with aces and kings, but I thought this particular one may be closer to like 50%. And then let's also throw in some stuff like ace king and ace queen on the slow play, king queen on the slow play. What else? Probably these combos as well. And let's say that they have, I don't know, maybe some ace jack, maybe some king jack, and throw queen jack suited in there just for good measure. And maybe like the occasional like jack 10 suited kind of hand. So that way there's at least some air in here, there's definitely some value stuff, and there's definitely some more marginal single pair kind of stuff. Now let's really focus in and see how our opponent is likely to respond facing a check raise. So what I want to do here is use a 2-color system. And by the way, this range of hands, maybe you agree with it, maybe you disagree with it. You're more than welcome to take this kind of model and then plug in your own ranges and assumptions, plug that into the actual calculator and see what comes out. And this is a little bit lazy because we could go in here and say, okay, well, we're going to plug in king 10 suited as well. We're just going to choose the diamond combos, and we could do all that, spend a bunch of time in here. I'm just going to take the overall broad strokes approach. So let's just say that we end up here, we're going to use a two-color approach where blue are all the hands that are going to continue against our check raise, and we're going to say everything else in gray is going to be stuff that folds against the check raise. So it is kind of a smaller check raise, right? We check raised a $25 bet up to 75 total. So let's assume they continue with all the flush draws, all of the, let's just say trips or better. So go with that, and obviously that includes things like full houses as well as that little combo of quads up there. And here we are. So we notice that they would be folding about 62% of the time. And if we were to plug that into a simple calculator, we can do all that very easily. The money win in this spot would be the pot before we check raise, which is 110 bucks. We are risking $75, and we're doing this in such a way where if our opponent continues, we're just assuming that we're completely toast, completely dead in the water, really have no chance of winning the pot. So we're going to make the assumption of a full loss, and we think our opponent is going to fold, what, 62% of the time? We win the pot when they fold, we lose it when they continue, whether they shove, whether they call, based upon the way we've structured this whole thing, and let's see what it looks like. So actually, given all of the assumptions we've made so far, this is actually plus EV to the tune of about 40 bucks. Not too bad. Now you may be wondering, okay, if this is plus EV to the tune of 40 bucks, how is this possibly a bad check raise, right? And the issue here is, what else would we check raise with in this situation? Most importantly, are we check raising with any value combos, right? If we had something like Queen Jack, are we going to check raise in this situation? If we had something like slow played pocket sixes or pocket eights, are we more likely to check raise the turn, or are we more likely just to lead the turn out ourselves? And as such, we really don't have very many value combinations in our check raising range on the turn. And that's really the big kicker. If our opponent is a big thinking player, it may not make a tremendous amount of sense, and we actually may not generate the kind of folds that we're looking for, because the overall line doesn't really make any sense, doesn't really look particularly real. And that's definitely something you want to think about when you're playing against better opponents is, do I ever have strong hands in this range? Also ask the question, do we ever have bluffs in this range? And that is a really good starting point for having a conversation on the validity of taking a specific line really anywhere along the spectrum of post-flop play. So that's the way that I would think about this kind of situation. So the overall play does look to be plus EV. Our opponent does end up finding the fold button not too long after this, but this is still the kind of situation where I like to really think about it, really analyze it, and end up showing it and just put a little bit of dirt in that wound, setting it up for a later hand. All right, let's look at another situation. It's about a half hour later in the same session. Look down at, there is a $5 straddle on. Small blind comes along, big blind folds, a limp behind, raised to 15, cutoff calls, hold around back to me, I call as well, and I'm going three-way to it. Flop is 8-7-6 rainbow, I check. Position fires for 40 total, cutoff folds, and I check raise this all in. So one of the reasons why I love all in situations is they are incredibly mathematical, very, very easy to proof out. So let's do that now. Pull out Flopzilla and get to work. So starting by plugging in the board, we have the 8 of diamonds, 7 of spades, 6 of hearts. And again, we would normally plug in our whole cards here, but we're just going to say that they're complete air. They don't interact with the board in any meaningful way, making this pure air, which means that we are very, very focused on making sure that our opponent is going to fold enough. So what do we think their betting range is right this moment? And I think it's probably pretty fair to say that it's going to be something like 7s plus. I'm not sure that 6s always raises preflop. I think that probably limps behind. 7s is probably right around the cusp of hands that they would raise for. And I didn't think that they were going to have much of a difference between when they raised to 15 versus, say, a different number preflop. I thought most of their raising range was going to be whatever number they chose, 15 in this situation. Not saying it should be that, I'm just saying that was my assumption here. And I think this is probably a pretty fair betting range. Honestly, I don't think in a multi-way pot they're going to be betting like ace-king, ace-queen, king-queen kind of hands. I think this is very, very strong most of the time because you have someone who is on kind of the tag-ish, reg-ish side of the spectrum, and they are c-betting in a multi-way pot on such a board. I think this is probably more of what we're looking for. Not saying it should be this, but I'm not going to be shocked if it's looking a lot like this kind of betting range. So if we again use a two-color system where blue are all the hands that our opponent is going to bet continue with, and all the gray is stuff they're going to bet and then fold facing our all-in with, then we're in a situation where looking at this spot, what are they going to fold? And if you think they're going to always continue with overpairs and obviously always continue with their sets as well, then they're continuing 100% of the time. Not particularly good when we're bluffing, so let's just keep that in mind. But if we pull out the calculator real quick and look at the overall condition here, again, because we have total air, the money that we're fighting for is 97 bucks, the $57 pot plus their $40 continuation bet. How much would we lose if we call and end up losing this pot? Losing 252. And let's just say that they are continuing 100% of the time, which means we never ever win this. This is obviously negative EV to the exact tune of our size, which is 252 bucks. So not particularly great by any stretch of the imagination. However, there is one piece of contextual information that I have not shared with you yet. Yes, this person is taggy and they seem to be reggy and they're definitely trying. However, earlier in the session, I saw them fold a set on the flop against a possible made straight. Like, they folded it face up. Like, I don't know what the heck is going on here. And when you see someone who is possibly that tight, and there's no real reason to fold, like strategically, like no reason whatsoever that you should be finding a fold with a set there. And he would have been very, very good had he called and would have ended up doubling up in a situation. So again, it made zero sense whatsoever. Someone who is that tight and has shown themselves to be that tight is someone who may not be continuing 100% of the time here, right? Maybe we look at their overpairs and think they're going to fold some of them a chunk of the time. Maybe we think they're going to fold things like tens, jacks, queens, kings half the time and continue always with pocket nines because it's an overpair, plus it also has the open and straight draw, and pocket aces, let's just say that's going to be 100% too. Now all of a sudden you notice that we are getting some folds. Now all of a sudden they're folding roughly 21% of the time. So if we go back to the EV equation, now we are winning this 21% of the time, and it's still a negative EV shove, but it's getting better and better. If we thought our opponent was the kind who's going to fold pretty much every single overpair, except for maybe exactly pocket nines, then we have a very different situation since our opponent's clearly going to be folding significantly more. Now all of a sudden we're winning this 57% of the time. Perfect. And we unfortunately still have a negative EV get it in here. So this is a very, very bad check raise, even in a situation where our opponent is folding a ton of their possible betting range. So not great for us. However, there is one very important thing that's running through my head, and that is that they did fold a set against a possible made straight earlier in the session on the flop. So maybe they're actually not going to continue with sets in this situation. And if they're not continuing with sets, and I can have a tremendous amount of the nuttish combos and my opponent really never can, maybe I can get a tremendous amount of folds here. And then if that's the case, I can pretty much go through here and uncheck just about everything because they're going to fold all their overpairs if they're going to fold sets, and they're going to fold the sets, and again, you have 100% win percentage in that situation. Then when you plug that in here, then obviously this is going to be super profitable to the tune of what you're fighting for, or that $97 in the middle. So this is something that I really could never justify getting away with in, I don't know, pretty much any situation, except against a player who has proven that they will fold pretty much the nuttiest of hands in their possible range because they are very, very fearful. So again, most all of the time this is going to be a horrifically bad check raise unless you have the most specific parameters possible. And I think I got a little bit lucky in this situation that my opponent did not end up snapping me off. So after check raising, our opponent thinks for a little while, and they end up letting it go. Ship the little pot over to us and end up showing it just to rub a little bit of extra dirt in that wound. He was none too happy about this one. So again, both of these check raises were a little optimistic to say the least. And in fact, I'd say in the long run, these are not going to work out. They happen to in this situation, and we don't want to say, oh, well, because we won the pot, clearly we made a good play. I don't think that's the case here, especially in this final hand. However, it is definitely something that's worth studying and exploring between sessions, and then saying, okay, how good or bad is it really? Are there any parameters or conditions that could make this a viable check raise, or not really? Because overall, especially in this last one, I could definitely have a lot of nutted hands. So maybe our opponent does end up folding more, or maybe they end up over c-betting the flop, and the more and more hands that they can possibly c-bet and then fold against a check shove, the better and better our hand gets. But again, we need a tremendous amount of folds here, and I think overall we're unfortunately not going to get them. So hopefully this helps you think about some check raise bluff situations in your game. And if you have any comments or questions about these spots, please do not hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, you can always post on our Discord, redchippoker.com/discord, to join for free, post your own hands, or even ask questions about these spots if you have any. Great community over there of people that love poker just as much as you and I do. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. Please make sure to give this video a thumbs up on the way out if you enjoyed it. And again, if you need anything, don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you back shortly with a brand new video. And in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.